Well, we have a lot to cover tonight. It's only 4 chapters or so, but there's a lot that happens in this period of time. So in some ways, it kind of seems like we've gone through the book of Joshua quickly. I guess if you're comparing that to Genesis, which was for a whole quarter, then okay, so that's not exactly apples to apples. And in the last quarter, there were several books that we went through. And so far, the book of Joshua has gone by pretty quick to me. And I think Judges will be that way as well. And so we've kind of come to this point here where Joshua is going to be leaving this earth pretty soon. You know, and he knows that, he sees that, he realizes it. But still there's a lot to do. And so in these last 4 chapters or so, boy, it's kind of like a download of information. A lot of stuff that he kind of puts out there and wants Israel to be aware of. Now, I've noticed, and I know you did too, most of it's not new news. He's reminding them again of some things that they need to know and ways that they need to be living. He covers some things like, the cities of refuge. That's already been introduced in the Bible story, but here is the implementation of that. He talks about the inheritance for the Levites. Well, the land distribution has already taken place for all of the other tribes. Well, what about the Levites? There is just a proclamation that God has fulfilled his promises. We talked about that a little bit on Sunday, but it comes up again. I'm thinking point of emphasis here is being made. There is Joshua's charge to the leaders of Israel. It's not like he hasn't talked to them before, but this is the last time. And so it seems like there's some extra emphasis on that. And you have that parting message from Joshua to Israel as a whole. And so I'm going to go back to this eye chart right here. Yeah, don't look at it too close. It's hard for me to read it, and I have it right here in front of me. But maybe it'll just remind us to talk about a couple of things here that's important. So we get into the inheritance for the Levites and stuff like that, and the cities of refuge. Well, there's some references to different tribes and such that I just want us to have in our mind. And so we're going back here a little bit. We think about the 12 sons of Jacob, and then in particular, we're narrowing down here to the lineage of Levi. And the purpose of this is because how are these cities going to be broke up? Well, it has something to do with the lineage here, is kind of the way this flows. And so there is Levi's clan. You notice his sons and his lineage, but his sons up there at the top of the page. His sons Gershon and Kohath and Merari. So when we talk about these cities of refuge, those clans are going to come up, those people. But then down a little bit farther is Aaron. You remember, Miriam and Aaron and Moses were brothers and sister. And, of course, we know all about Moses. Now here's a bit of a focus on Aaron, where, of course, he's gone, isn't he? It's his lineage. It's his lineage that we're talking about, the priests of Aaron. And so here's this little thought. You already know this, but just to have it in mind, all priests were Levites, but not all Levites were priests. Okay, so when we talk about the priests, that is of the lineage of Aaron. That's who are the priests. And so just looking at that family tree, maybe it's helpful for us to have those things in mind. And then a reminder again, the descendants of Gershon and Kohath and Merari, they serve as assistants to the priests. And so we're going back to this Numbers chapter 4 passage where this is all kind of laid out. Who does what? And so among the Levites, there are responsibilities with regard to the worship of the children of Israel. And of course, we have that tabernacle and all the furnishings that go inside in the courtyard. And it was moved from one place to another. How did that happen? Well, it was the clans of Levi that did that and took care of that. But what's interesting is they all had specific responsibilities. When it came time to move, they didn't just all run out there and start picking up pieces. That might not be your piece to move. It was God who determined who was taking care of what and who was moving what piece. And so as far as the Gershonites were concerned, They were the ones that carried the curtains for the tabernacle. They carried all of the outer court and the covering that went on. Covering of sea cows is what some versions say. Really, it's an idea of fine leather. Some have presumed that the leather of sea cows was the finest leather of the time. And so some versions insert that. I think it's a little bit of an insertion. I think this should be like fine leather is what it was. But, to think about it for a moment, to be moving and carrying all the curtains in the outer court, and that was a lot to move and a lot of weight. And you'll notice that they could use oxen, they could use carts to move all of that. It was quite a chore. The same thing with the Maronites. They carried the frames of the tabernacle, the crossbars, to hold up the ceiling, the posts and the bases. And that was all heavy stuff. They used oxen and carts as well. But then to focus for a moment on the clan of Kohath, they cared for the most holy things, the things inside of the tabernacle. Aaron and his sons were the ones who, as the priests, they were the ones that prepared everything to be moved. And then the Kohathites, they came and they carried everything. And how did they carry them? How did they move those things? Their shoulders, remember? That was specific, how they were to move these things. And so, I know that's already all been talked about. But when we come to this point where there's the inheritance going to the Levites, and these clans are called out, let's just remember that these clans had different responsibilities. They were all of the tribe of Levi, but different clans with different responsibilities that were here. And so it was Aaron's sons who were authorized to offer the sacrifices and to perform the priestly duties. They were the ones that did that. Thoughts or comments about any of that? All right. So let's talk some about these cities of refuge. We're in Joshua chapter 20. We're going to read just a little bit here. Joshua chapter 20, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge, as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally or unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. When he flees to one of these cities, he is to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state his case before the elders of that city. Then they are to admit him into the city and give him a place to live with them. If the avenger of blood pursues him, they must not surrender the one accused because he killed his neighbor unintentionally and without malice and forethought." So, the purpose then, that's the purpose of these cities of refuge. Verse 6 actually goes on to say, "He is to stay in that city until he stood trial before the assembly, and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then he may go back to his own home in the town from which he fled." Well, that's kind of an interesting concept on how this is dealt with. This was God's plan. Remember, this was God speaking to through Joshua on these things. And so on the map you see that there are 3 cities on the west side of the Jordan. There are 3 cities on the east side of the Jordan, these cities of refuge. This was by God's design. This is how it was to be. But then, as the text goes on, the rest of as the text goes on, chapter 21, we get into the towns of the Levites. And now we start talking about this inheritance for the Levites. Reading a little bit again, just the first 3 verses. "Now the family heads of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the other tribal families of Israel at Shiloh in Canaan, and said to them, 'The Lord commanded through Moses that you give us towns to live in with pasture lands for our livestock. So, as the Lord has commanded, the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own inheritance.'" So that's an interesting, that last phrase. So who's giving up the land here? Each tribe. And it's coming from different clans even among the tribes. And so 13 cities for the descendants of Aaron. It's all numbered out here. 10 from the clans of Kohath, 13 the clans of Gershonites, 12 for the Meronite clans, 48 cities in all. So why is it? Why is it that the Levites are getting these cities this way? Explain that to me now. So what's going on? Almost like a tithe. Okay? Maybe something to this. Tell me some more. Why is it happening this way?
Rather than have all the Levites in one area, they are now spread through all the nation of Israel, if you will.
Right.
Where they have a better, more able to influence, teach, and guide the people in God's law.
This is part of God's plan that the Levites, and we're talking about now the spiritual leaders of Israel, that they are spread throughout the country in 48 cities throughout the country. It's not that far for anyone to be able to go to one of those cities, seeking counsel or help, or for the priests, as far as that goes, to be able to go out of the city to places to be able to teach. So as we look at, I guess it was on Sunday, the division of the lands, there were the 12 tribal units, but Levi was not a part of that, remember? Because this is the promise to them. There's no tribe of Joseph, because that was divided into two by his sons. And so here now is the inheritance that God had promised, to these. So the Levites did not receive a land promise, as in a tribe that way, a large land promise, but they were given this promise. And this is kind of interesting to think about. And this goes back to Numbers chapter 18 that's already been talked about in study, but just kind of as a reminder here. How is it then that the Levites are, how do you say this? How are they paid? How are they supported? Well, the sacrifices, they would partake of sacrifices. What else? Tithes. I mean, this is a big part of it was the tithes. Important for us to think about. I think there's one distinction for us to make. We do not tithe today. Sometimes we hear a lot of people around us talking about tithing. In the New Testament church, Christians, we don't tithe. Tithing was specific to the old law, giving of the first fruits, giving 10%. They were told how much to give. That was a tithe. We give. It's a free will offering. Give as we have prospered, and encouraged, really commanded as strongly as the Old Testament tithe was to the Israelites to give as we have prospered. But we don't give a tithe. We're not tied to that 10%. It was very specific that way in the Old Testament. And so the support then of these Levites, of the priests, was through that system of tithing. The children of Israel were giving for that reason and for that purpose. I do find this to be a little bit interesting and even somewhat uncomfortable to bring up. What we see there really is something that is not foreign to us in the New Testament and support of preachers. This idea of the people of God, those who are the people of God, supporting those who are feeding them and nourishing them spiritually, goes back to this period of time. Now, in the New Testament, we find such things said as that those who preach the gospel should live by the gospel, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Other passages as well that talk about that. And yet we find that every preacher wasn't paid. Every preacher wasn't supported. There were those who made tents. I think perhaps for various reasons. Sometimes there was not support available. Sometimes it was better to not be in any obligation to anyone. I think there's something to that sometimes. But I'm just making the point. The idea of supporting financially those who are bringing the gospel, those who are bringing God's word, the idea of supporting them financially goes back a long way. I think there's just something to be with that. Ben, you're not going to make me more uncomfortable, are you?
No. I want to tenth, right, 10%. That was not something that was new with the law of Moses. That seemed to have already been in place.
Good
somewhat.
point.
So you have Abraham in Genesis 15.
That's right.
Or 14, who gives a tenth of the plunder when he saved Lot and he took all the plunder from the kings. He gave a tenth of that to Melchizedek.
He did.
Right? So that 10% idea is there even before Moses. So maybe that seems to have been a custom already, and then Moses in the law just built onto that. But there is a principle there, maybe. You know, that question often comes up among Christians. Well, how much should we give? We don't want to make laws where God didn't, but there does seem to be something to the 10% number.
Yeah. Do we have an example? We don't have a command of such in the New Testament, but you know, we have an idea.
Precedent.
A precedent. Yeah, I think that's good. That's right. Okay. The land promise being fulfilled. Chapter 21, verse 43. And this chapter comes to an end here. Okay, so the cities have been given to the Levites. We're kind of wrapping up some thoughts here. Again, in verse 43, we just talked about this on Sunday, but here it comes up again. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their forefathers, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their forefathers. Not one of their enemies withstood them. The Lord handed all their enemies over to them. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. We really tried to call a point of emphasis to that on Sunday for all the reasons we talked about then. I just like that it has come up here again. We make that point. Okay, let's look on here just a little bit more.
Hey, Joe?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I hate to make another comment. Can you go back to the cities of refuge?
I can.
Slide. I want to reinforce, go back one more. I want to reinforce something that you brought out earlier. Up on the screen, you've got Deuteronomy 19, 1 through 14. It's a really important text to go back to this idea that you've been talking about. Did God give them all of the land? Right? And we talked about premillennial ideas. Oh, that promise was never fulfilled. Okay? In Deuteronomy 19 and in verse 8, Moses says, you should appoint 3 cities of refuge. But when the Lord gives you, and in Deuteronomy 19:8, he says, when he gives you all the land that he swore to your fathers, then you are supposed to add 3 more cities.
Yeah, which they have just done.
And so now we have 6. So
That's
what
right.
does that mean?
Yep, conclusion.
It means God fulfilled that
Yeah,
land promise.
That's right. That's right. Good point. I'm glad you brought that up. All right. Now, thoughts? Let's look at chapter 22. In chapter 22, there's a little bit of kind of a bizarre episode that takes place here. You remember the tribes that had settled over on the east side of the Jordan? There was some concern at first that their purpose on settling on that side of the Jordan would mean that they don't have to come and fight to conquer the rest of the land. That was a bit of an uproar took place because of that. But no, they confirmed the idea. We plan to come and to fight for the other side, and they've done that. They've been there for the whole time of conquering this land, but now that's done. And so they're heading back home to the other side. In chapter 22, just reading a little bit here, beginning of verse 1, then Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh and said to them, you have done all that Moses the servant of the Lord commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded for a long time now. To this very day, you have not deserted your brothers, but have carried out the mission of the Lord your God, that Lord your God gave you. Now that the Lord your God has given your brothers rest as he promised, return to your homes in the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But be very careful to keep the commandment of the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to obey his commands, to hold fast to him and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. So all is good. All is good. All sounds good. They're going home. I'm sure they're ready. They're anxious to go home. They've been away from their families now for a long time, and Joshua sends them away. And in verse 8 he says, return to your homes with your great wealth. Great, where'd that come from? Well, there was wealth that came from Egypt, but that was a long time ago.
Oh, from conquering.
Yeah, from conquering, Canaan and all of that. And so there's been a lot of plunder that's been gathered and conquered along the way. And he's, take this great wealth with large herds of livestock, silver, gold, bronze, iron, and a great quantity of clothing. Divide it with your brothers, the plunder from your enemies. So now, again, we're just getting a picture of what's going on and what they have and where they're going. But now what kind of caused a bit of a problem is that these tribes built an altar. As they prepared to cross over the river, they built an altar. Verse 10, when they came to Gileath, near the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, half-tribe Manasseh, built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. Why would that be a problem? Why would building an altar be a problem? Tell me.
So far, none of them have been described this way. So it almost is like, are we having a mini battle moment where we have to show off how cool we are? And we're not just doing the basic focus on God. This is a simple altar that calls us to remember Him. It's be a little showy and glorify myself for a moment.
It says an imposing altar, but I don't know that the rest of the story really gives us the impression that it was for the purpose of being showy. But what did the other side think about it, though, Sarah? What did they think? What was their problem with it? Huh? Wow.
Replacing what you've been commanded to do.
Well, it was,
That's what they thought.
they thought that maybe they were building something to another god, that now they're forgetting about Jehovah God, and that they were moving on to something else, that they were kind of separating from this other side, and it caused quite a stir, because the other side, the 9.5 tribes, there were those who thought that it's like, man, they've left Jehovah God, and now they're wanting to worship some foreign gods. But that wasn't the thought. That wasn't their purpose at all. In fact, when there was a confrontation, that's not really what. Well, I guess it was kind of a confrontation. Well, what did Joshua do to try to sort this out? Can you tell me? What did he do to try to sort this out? Who did he send? He sends a delegation with him, right? He doesn't send just one. He sends 10. Representative from each tribe, like a chief from each tribe. To do what? To go to them and talk and try to, what are you doing? What do you think you're doing? And so when the side on the east, the 2.5 tribes, when they explained their purpose, what did they say? Verse 21. The Reuben and Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the clans of Israel. The mighty one, God, the Lord. The mighty one, God, the Lord, He knows. And let Israel know. If this has been done in rebellion or disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us this day. If we have built our own altar to turn away from the Lord and to offer burnt offerings and grain offerings or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it, may the Lord Himself call us to account. No, we did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, what do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you Reubenites and Gadites. You have no share in the Lord, so your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord. That's an interesting turn of events. I mean, the delegation that has gone to them is gone there kind of accusing them, you're leaving the Lord. But they're saying, no, that's not the purpose of this altar. It's what we're trying to do is put a reminder here so your descendants don't forget who we are. And that's your descendants don't forget that we serve the same God you serve. That was the purpose, right? And so that's kind of an interesting exchange right there. And so verse 26, this is why we said, let us get ready and build an altar, but not for burnt offerings or sacrifice. On the contrary, it is to be a witness between us and you and the generations that follow, that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings and sacrifices and fellowship offerings. Then in the future, your descendants will not be able to say to ours, you have no share in the Lord. That was the purpose. So I think that was good. That really kind of helped to clarify what that was all about right there. It was a reminder for generations to come to see. And so in verse 34 it says, and the Reubenites and the Gadites gave the altar this name, a witness between us that the Lord is God. And so it was more of an affirmation of their faith and service to God. That's what that was about. Okay, chapter 24. Oh, chapter 23 first.
So where is the tabernacle at this point? They know it went into the land, but it's not set up like the camp anymore.
No, but it's still at Shiloh now, isn't it? It still be at Shiloh.
Okay.
Is that right? You think?
Would there be other altars, or would it still just be the tabernacle altar?
Verse 29
just-
to speak to that in this very chapter 22. Verse 29 addresses that. It seems that the other tribes on the west side of the Jordan thought a big problem with this altar you've built is that you're trying to replace the one that goes with the tabernacle.
Right.
And they said, no, we're not burning anything on this.
Right.
As you described, this is.
But I was trying to remember, where is the tabernacle right now? Is it still in Shiloh? That's what I'm thinking. It's still in Shiloh right now.
Yes.
Yeah. I think,
It will be
Zach,
there.
I think that's what.
It will end up in Shiloh. I don't know that we know exactly where it is at this point.
I'll remember at this moment. I'm still thinking it might be there. Okay. Chapter 23 kind of enters into this next phase, this really the final phase of some things that Joshua has to say to Israel. More specifically in these first few verses he's addressing the leaders. Chapter 23, verse 1. After a long time had passed, the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, and Joshua, by then old and well advanced in years, summoned all Israel, the elders, leaders, judges, officials, and he said to them, I am old and well advanced in years. You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I have allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered between the Jordan and the great sea in the west. The Lord your God himself will drive them out of your way. He will push them out before you, and you will take possession of their land as the Lord your God promised you. He's reminding them, God has given you rest. God has fulfilled his promises. Now there is this time of rest. I'm not going to be with you long, he says, but the Lord will be with you. Here becomes a point of emphasis. I'm not going to be with you much longer. Sounds a little bit like Moses. He's saying, I'm not going to be with you much longer, but the Lord will. The Lord will if you remain his people, which is what God has said always, all the way through. Verse 6, he says, be strong, be very strong, be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses without turning aside to the right or to the left. Boy, he really sounds like Moses now, doesn't he? I mean, that's some of the very same things that Moses said long before. And here Joshua's he's repeating that very thing, that theme right there. He reminds them about God's faithfulness. Verse 9. The Lord has driven out before you great and powerful nations. To this day no one has been able to withstand you. One of you routs 1,000 because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. This point again, that God fights for you. God fights for you. Maybe it's a little bit of a reminder to them of some times in the past when things did not go well for them. Because God wasn't with them at that moment, because they had left God. There was a moment of humbling, discipline maybe, to bring them back to God. And as long as God was with them, they were fine. There was not an army that they could not overcome. And Joshua was saying that that's still right and that's still true. But if you turn away, then God is not with you. Powerful words. I mean, the principle of what's being said plays just as well for us today as it did all of these hundreds and hundreds of years ago. The principle is still there. That if God is on our side, what have we to fear? If God is on our side, there is nothing to fear. In verse 14, now I'm about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. But just as every good promise of the Lord your God has come true, so the Lord will bring on you all the evil he has threatened until he has destroyed you from this good land he has given you. If you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he promised, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he is giving to you. There seems to be a lot of repetition in what Joshua is saying to what Moses has said. And the principle of what's being said is true throughout the Bible story. And the principle is true today. That if we are God's people and we are walking with him, there are great blessings that come with that. But if we are not walking with him, we should not expect his blessings. We should expect his judgment. We live in a time where it seems that many do not want to talk about judgment. In fact, some kind of address God or try to define or describe God as one who would not make any judgment. But throughout the text, we can't find a time where God was not making judgment. Making judgment based on the criteria that he has set, the criteria that he has put in place, and repeatedly he made judgment based on that. Judgment that was for good or for bad, depending on the willingness of his people to accept and obey. Our God is a righteous judge. That is, he's not going to make judgments on something different, something new than what he has told us, but he is righteous in that way. Some thoughts you may have, comments? Jake?
Just a comment on the notion of Moses and then Joshua telling the people, hey, my time here is over. Look to the Lord is still on your side. I just think to when Jesus tells the apostles, I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm like, he's not passing it on to somebody else. He's taking ownership of that now.
Yeah.
And kind of fulfilling the idea of what they're saying. And there's some action in my mind that makes that a little bit sweeter of a thought of he's not passing that off to anybody else. He is the one who's taking on that burden and treating us, just like Joshua and Moses was.
Jesus is that for us. And as he goes to prepare a place for us, as he said in John chapter 14, there are great promises that came with that. What did not change was that as he spoke and gave his word and law, that to receive those promises, we have to obey what he said. I mean, it's consistent with everything we're reading in the Old Testament. The principle is all the same with that. It's kind of hard to even try to picture and imagine the scene. If you can think of the old man Joshua as he's standing before the leaders of Israel and he's sharing these ideas and these thoughts, nothing that's really new, but reminding them of what they should have already known. God has fulfilled every promise. God has taken care of us till this time. God will continue to care and bless Israel, as long as you are faithful to him. But God's anger will burn against you if you do not submit to him. Don.
As we've gone through this, both last quarter and this quarter, we've commented many times on how this is a reminder to them. This is repetition to them. And when we look at their history, how much do they need that reminder? Every generation that has come along has received this reminder multiple times,
Right.
because they keep turning. They keep falling back. But what a reminder for us. The same way. How much in our lives do we need to have this kind of constant reminder?
Absolutely. So very true today. Ben and I were talking here just in the last week about sermon ideas and some things like that, and we thought about something maybe needs to be preached on, but we kind of went like, we just did that series. We used a lot of those same passages, at that time. Probably, maybe we never put off the idea of this sermon for a while. Well, repetition is not a bad thing. In fact, in preaching, you will hear repetition. And I will tell you that very often it's by design. Even if something was preached on not long ago of a similar topic or similar passages were used, no, we shouldn't use the same ones all the time. I get that. But there is something to repetition. And we see that so much throughout the Old Testament story. Oh, and the New Testament too, absolutely.
Reminded.
They did. Chapter 24 is interesting. We find ourselves again in Shechem. We've been here before, Shechem, you might say. And there's been a lot of events that have taken place right here. Abraham's covenant with God was here. Jacob settled here. Diana was defiled here. Blessings and curses, Deuteronomy 27 and 28. That the message that was given and delivered from Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Blessings and cursings. Joshua renewed a covenant here. It's what we're reading about right now. Here's where we are. And this is more or less a covenant renewal. Joseph's bones are going to be brought and buried here. Jeroboam's reign in the divided kingdom is going to take place and start here. Jesus taught the Samaritan woman, John chapter 4, right here in this area. Man, there's a lot that happens right here. In chapter 24, we won't be able to cover this the way I wanted to, really. As all of Israel is assembled here at Shechem, there is a review of their history. Chapter 24, Joshua kind of just goes through it. Remember this? Remember when God did this? Remember what happened there? It was these things. And he makes the point that God's promises are sure. And there was this covenant renewal that took place. And Joshua challenged Israel to serve God. Remember the passage that is so well known and remembered by us, I hope. Verse 14, now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of your forefathers worship beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your forefathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, or in whose land you are now living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. It's interesting to me, and not a little troubling, that after all that has happened, in the history of Israel that Joshua is still saying to them, you need to get rid of those other gods. Why are they even there? And some of the problems those gods have caused them, why do they even still have them? There is this admonition again. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But he says to them, you're going to have to choose. It's almost as though Joshua understands they're not all going to make the right choice. And in time, Israel as a whole does not make the right choice. And the gods from Egypt, that comes up again. Like they still have those. I don't understand that. But I guess it does tell us something about the way of man. And if we look at ourselves, we may find that we have some things that control us, that we know better of, that we know needs to not have a place in our life. And yet, it's still there. Choose this day whom you will serve. That's what Joshua said. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your comments.